If you like this podcast, share it with your friends. You can follow us on social media either on Facebook or on Twitter at cleverramblings. If you have any feedback or comments, please mail us at cleverramblings@gmail.com or visit our website cleverramblings.weebly.com. As always, we really appreciate you listening, and now enjoy today's podcast. This is the Clever Ramblings podcast. Welcome everyone. This is Moritz.
And I'm Ivan.
And today we're gonna talk how to grow brain cells in the lab. And we're gonna continue with the recent deplatforming of artists on Spotify. We're gonna talk about free will. And lastly, we also talk about this new cultural phenomenon called Yanny versus Laurel and why everybody is so obsessed about that one.
And just before we start about that, thanks everyone for the feedback for our first episode. And basically the advice that I got was that most of it was that I just need to stop talking as much. So I'm going to try and shut up.
But we all know that's gonna be really, really hard for you.
You really gonna throw shots, right? This podcast? Like, is this what we're doing? Because I could throw way more shots at you.
Oh, shut up.
But you'll find out.
Okay, let's just start.
To all our fans out there, shots will be thrown.
So then let's start with the growing brain cells in the lab. Well,
So tell me. This is more of I'm the brain guy, but this is more of your topic.
More molecular stuff, more cell biology. Yeah.
So you tell me what exactly is exciting about it for you.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start with how that even works. So these so-called three-dimensional structures of brains in the lab are called organoids, or basically brain organoids, and these structures get made from stem cells. You know what stem cells are? These cells that can differentiate into all kind of different cells, from skin cells to lung cells or whatever you have there. So what you do, you give them some different factors that stimulates them to becoming brain cells, and you do that in some kind of protein matrix that basically supplies the cell with nutrients and all they need to grow like a three-dimensional structures. And when you do all of this is very complicated, so I read up on this, and you have to do a lot of media changes, and it basically takes I read half a year just to get a three-dimensional structure that resembles the brain structure of, well, not actually a brain structure, but basically the basics of a human brain structure. So it takes a very long time, and it's a really complicated process, and I don't want to go into detail. But basically what you have then is like this half a centimeter big three-dimensional structures that resembles a brain, and you have all type of cells that you, for example, have retina cells, or you have parts of the cortex there, but they are just randomly assembled in the three-dimensional structures, so not like in our brain, of course, where you have defined areas where all the different neural cells are. And what's so fascinating about that is basically that you can work on a three-dimensional structure. And look, for example, neurodegenerative diseases. They are so interesting as they shrink the amount of neurons you have. And of course you can do trials with cell cultures, but they are never assembled in a three-dimensional structure, or even like that amount of interaction with each other that this organoid has. And that's what's so basically interesting about that you have a three-dimensional structures and not just a layer of cells that you can work on.
So it's basically, so if I get it right, just to simplify, that it's basically they have these molecules, and they're arranged in a three-dimensional structure.
Yeah,
they sort of mirror the, like, you know, basically they give all the nutrients to the cell that would enable it to grow and differentiate into neurons or nerve cells.
Yeah, well, you start off with different factors, and then you put the already grown neural cells into this matrix, and they start forming these three-dimensional structures. Because one thing that they can't do is build blood vessels, so they have to get the nutrients from somewhere, and they get it from these matrix where they supply proteins and other stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So they're mixing in actual neurons.
No, they do it from stem cells. They start with the stem cells.
Well,
from stem cells, they develop brain cells, and then they put these brain cells into the matrix, and they start forming this three-dimensional structures and differentiate into different types of neuronal cells.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now I think we went to a talk before when we were here in Cambridge, where they said that stem cells, when they naturally differentiate their natural sort of their not ground state, but their what am I looking for? Their sort of like prototypical stereotypical state to cell that they would differentiate into is a neuron cell, is a nerve cell.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I guess the cool thing this is really cool stuff. I mean, to do all that in only half a year is amazing, considering how, complicated cells are. And so the goal is sort of to somewhat have a model that is very close and mirrors how the brain works, but at a much smaller scale, so that you can study somewhat like diseases at a simpler level, and you can manipulate the system more easily.
But still, what you want is still a much more resembling to the actual brain that you have now, because, for example, you have to imagine that inside this ball there's nothing. So it's more like a sphere, not like a 3D ball, because all the cells that are inside don't get any nutrients. So of course the cells gonna move to the outside. So basically you have this sphere and not a real ball with cells inside them. And as they don't have any blood vessels, they don't resemble the brain on that way. And so,
but that's the goal, is what I'm saying. The goal is to figure out how to do that in order to study neural diseases at a smaller, at a more manageable level.
Yeah, and a more resembling level to the human brain, because of course you either have to use cell cultures, so that's basically just a layer of cells, and they could interact with each other, but of course not in a three-dimensional way. And the other thing you can do is look at rat brains or something like that, but of course then it's an animal model again. It's not the real brain. And the amazing thing is that it's basically human cells that arrange in a 3D structure that so far doesn't really closely resemble to a human brain, but shows like some signs of a human brain.
Okay, so my question is, so this sounds very, we've laid out the point, right? The point is to eventually get it to a level of complexity that is somewhat comparable to the human brain in order to study these diseases at a more manageable level. Yeah. How long do they stress, or at least do they think it would take before they can accomplish this goal, to make it more realistic to the actual brain?
Well, some estimate that it's gonna take another decade or something. So you have to imagine this is really young research. You could grow other organoids, so it's not only brain organoids, there are organoids for the heart or the liver or something like that. They've been doing that for a couple of years, but the brain organoids are very new, so like 2 or 3 years. So if you are at the beginning of that, it's probably gonna take a while, and especially as the human brain is the most complex organ. So to figure all that out, how you can arrange the cells where you want them, how to vascularize them, and all that gonna take a little bit long, I can imagine. I'm not an expert on neurobiology, but just from the basic knowledge I have, I'm imagining that it's gonna take a long time before they figure all that out.
Oh, look at you telling the neuroscientists that the brain is the most complex organ. That's so sweet. Thank you.
Well, there are not many other complex organs. Oh, well, that do such complex things.
I mean, come on, you have the gut. But anyway, we're going on a tangent. Yeah. But okay, so I mean, so it's still in the development stage, like the early developmental stage, which is a good point. Sort of like this related to this is that one thing about science that we hope to get through to our listeners, our moms, is that really complicated like puzzles and questions in science. So, for example, understanding the brain, or in a sense, build a brain in a way, take years and years and years. And think about cancer research, HIV research. This takes decades in order to really get a grasp on what's going on. And so for simple things, for more simpler phenomena, usually you can figure it out relatively easily and quick. But a lot of like now problems in science, as we progress and as we, become more sophisticated as a species, the problems that we're going to try to face and tackle are going to increase and be more sophisticated as well. And for that, I mean, yes, we have better tools in order to understand it, but it takes time. And so it's just basically the message is, be patient with science, because science takes, in order for us to do it right, we want to make sure that we take all the careful steps that we can to make sure we don't do something wrong, especially if it's something that we're trying to introduce into humans or any diseases or anything like that. So we have to make sure it's because we definitely don't want people getting sick or worst case scenario dying. So yeah. So that's cool. I mean, this and we'll put links to basically the description page of this organoid research, as well as where you can find like all the original articles. So like the original research papers in the description.
Yeah. And yeah.
So that's cool.
Yeah, it's great. And they're already doing some crazy shit. For example, you can get them vascularized if you put them into rat brains. And they don't act as a tumor, so basically the rat just lives on, but the cells start to vascularize. So that's already crazy. If you imagine putting them into brains of rats and they start doing that. And
you said the researchers are at Cambridge, correct?
One of them, a leading one. So I don't remember her name, but she's a neuroscience at Cambridge, and she's like one of the front runners for organoid research. So you could hit her up and talk about that.
Yeah, I'll be like, hey, yo.
What the organoids do.
Oh, you really made that joke. Okay.
Yeah. No.
Okay, cool. That's nice. And I guess, and maybe at a later episode, if, cause M follows this more closely because it's more related to the research he does. But we could update you if any breakthroughs or anything comes, in later episodes of the podcast. But for the next topic, which next topic do you want to tackle now?
Yeah, let's talk about Spotify then.
Spotify. So I'll introduce this topic. So I think the story now is about a week and a half, almost 2 weeks since we released the first podcast is when it kind of started, bubbling up and surfacing. But basically Spotify took Spotify was the leading streaming service to do this, and then all the other ones followed suit. So what it did, it took artists such as, like, it has this new, I think it's called like its hate policy, where basically on a case by case basis, which is important to note, it will selectively remove artists off of playlists. So for example, in a case, it removed R. Kelly from all the playlists on Spotify. So any playlist that you look for Spotify will not have his music. Same with a rapper called XXXTentacion. He's relatively new. Yeah, his name is like crazy.
Yeah.
But his music was also removed from Spotify playlists. However, and then Apple and other people, I believe, they also followed suit. Now, the good thing is, at least, that they have not removed them from the streaming services themselves. So you can still stream their music. You can still purchase their music. They just won't be broadcasting it on a playlist as things that maybe they should suggest you to listen to. And the reason for that is because, according to the hate policy, like anything that they deem as, basically that doesn't support like their core principal values, which, of course, we never really know what they are, and they change as money changes, but that's a whole nother story. But R. Kelly, I mean, of course, he's been accused of basically, a whole bunch of sexual misconduct, harassment, and assaults, especially with like underage minors. And, you know, he's not been convicted, but he's been accused. And then also XXXTentacion, he's been accused and is currently, I think I don't know if he's in court right now, but he's going through the proceedings now for domestic violence. So these are very serious charges. So basically what we want to raise is basically, is Spotify and all these other streaming services correct? Because I would say that at first I was very much against it. And I think the problem is that since it's on a case by case basis, there's no definitive guideline for what counts as this new hate policy. Right, it's no real policy. It's just,
I didn't read it, but it's probably very vague. You can decide basically if you don't like, or if you go case by case and you decide that's hate, and other one that is basically the same, you say that's not hate. Just because you can say, because of this vagueness, you can make a case by case and not look overall with what is hate and what not.
Yeah, and the big issue was, it's like, okay, well, is this going to create like a cascade of them taking, because you could think about artists that they haven't taken down. So for example, there was, I think there was some women's rights groups that were calling for Eminem to be taken out of playlist, as well as Chris Brown, because, you know, Eminem's lyrics are very violent and misogynistic.
But then you have to take off a lot of people.
Exactly. Like, and so for example, like I brought up the example earlier, we were talking about this earlier, is like Guns N' Roses. Apparently they have a song, I think it's called 1 in a Million. I haven't listened to it, but apparently it has, in the song, they basically are allegedly very discriminatory against immigrants and black people, and they even use the N-word. And so no one's outraged at them necessarily. And think of all the artists that are on these streaming services. There's definitely some racist shit or some xenophobic shit. Like you basically, like, without a policy, and this is very vague, it really can be perceived as biased. And I don't like that aspect of it. If it's a policy, then I'm fine with it. But again, I think it depends on, like, if you haven't been convicted of a crime, I think I'm a little bit more against it, because if you haven't been convicted and it hasn't been proven. However, I do believe that, like, so for example, for very serious, like, accusations like R. Kelly and XXXTentacion, the streaming services, that they don't want to promote you on their playlist because at this point in time you're under review for some very, very serious shit, then I think that yes, as you know, because they don't want to unintentionally promote anyone or any message that is bad, I think they should definitely, if they feel is their need, to remove them from the playlist. However, if especially in hip hop, people are charged with a lot of things. Like, so if it's like a drug case or having a gun, or, you know, basically I think they need a policy, because you need to find out, well, not all crimes, in my opinion, are equal. And so you have to sort of say, okay, maybe you take these people down, but not these people down. But if you do it on a case by case basis, yes, you get specific, but if you have no general guideline of how you do this, then I think it can be very discriminatory.
But I think you can make up a general guideline for all that, because then you're just gonna play like kids song on there. I think it depends on the artist. If the artist did some really bad shit, like if you get charged with whatever sexual molestation or something like that, then I would remove him for the place. And first of all, they can do whatever they want. They're a private company, they can do whatever they want. They can say, I don't want to hear you because you sing about that or that. They can do whatever they want. But what I think is that if the artist didn't do anything, but his songs are very misogynist, just keep their music on there. And if you don't want to listen to it, then don't listen to it. If you listen to classical music all the time, probably you're not gonna get a promotion for R. Kelly. So I think as long as the artist has a clear west and didn't do anything, just leave his music on there. If he does any crime that are very, very serious, then you should think about removing it from playlists.
Yeah, and so like really my final stance is I agree with Em that they should be able to, because they're a private company, they can market it however they want. Only thing I would say is I don't care, even if you've been convicted of a crime, I don't care how serious the crime is, or I believe that, well, in a world where, like, I don't think that their music should ever be taken off the streaming service. Well, but I mean, I guess unless the private company, but like this, me personally, if I had a streaming service,
yes,
I would never remove a person's music, regardless of the content of the music, even if it's very racist or very anything, or what crime they've committed, because I believe, in my opinion, that all information should be at least there.
Yeah.
And you as the listener should choose to listen and not to listen to what you want.
Yeah, you're right. I meant not promoting it, but not taking it off the.
Right, exactly.
Completely.
Not taking it off. Yeah. So you can promote how you want, but I think me and Em agree on this in this way that you shouldn't completely take it off, but you can choose how you market and what you promote, and that's definitely within reason.
Yeah, exactly. The next thing we did want to talk about was the Yanny and Laurel, and that's basically this new phenomenon that went viral on, I think it started on Reddit, I don't know for sure, but I think it started on Reddit. Basically an audio clip that's like 15 seconds long or something, that you could either interpret it in hearing Yanny or Laurel, and everyone on the internet the last couple of weeks went crazy about that, who hears what. Basically it's the Dress 2.0, if you remember, was it gold and white or blue and white? So
yeah, gold and white versus the blue and white dress.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I saw gold and white.
I don't
for that dress.
I don't even remember what I saw. It's been like a year or maybe even more than a year.
I think it was a little bit. I think it was more. It was about like 2 or 3 years ago, because I'm pretty sure I was still in college when I.
Yeah, but I didn't even see the Yanny and Laurel until I went on Instagram. And it was full with stuff of that. Like some memes where they just talked about that all in my whole feed. There was the Yanny and Laurel. I was like, what the fuck is that? And then I saw it. And basically, you did research on how that actually works. Why can people hear different shit? So tell me. So
basically, it really comes down to, and we'll provide a link to, basically the YouTube video that we watched that we both watched as sort of a description of what's going on. It's from researchers at MIT. They basically sort of disentangled basically what's happening. So it really comes down to so your brain will interpret sensory input. So whether it's sounds, sounds, sensory input, like tactile, touching, hearing, seeing, in a variety of different ways, and interpret it depending on previous experience and how your brain is basically organized. And so in a lot of ways your brain filters out a lot of information in order to just show to you, the conscious observer, what's necessary and what's relevant. So a lot of information that gets sent to your brain actually is kind of like noise, or at least it gets filtered out as noise. And so depending on how your brain is organized, and also depending on the number, like the condition of your hair cells, which are like these special cells that are in your ear that basically help you to conduct sound and help you and are responsible for you hearing. That at a high frequency, you'll hear, so the two names are either Laurel or Yanny, and at a high frequency, you'll hear one of them. And at a lower frequency, if your cells pick up more lower frequencies, you'll hear another. And so basically, whether you hear, like I always hear Laurel, like no matter what. Like even I tried listening for Yanny and everything, I always hear Laurel. But some people, they always hear Yanny. And it basically it's that our hair cells are basically specialized for different frequencies. So it basically depends on like how many hair cells you have. So I think Laurel, if I remember correctly, Laurel will be heard is
the low frequency.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so my hair cells are specialized for, in this case, for more lower frequencies. Yeah. Which one did you hear?
It was freaky. When I start hearing it, it said Yanny, And as soon as it says, so I watched the video, I didn't just watch the audio clip, and as soon as the word Laurel came on the screen, I heard Laurel. And I can't go back to Yanny after that. I don't know why, but it was so crazy. Because I first thought, okay, I hear Yanny, and then it switched, and suddenly it was Laurel. So I don't know what my hair cells are doing there all over the place. Probably my visual senses are playing more role in that. But
your hair cells are confused.
Yeah, they are confused.
Hair cells are just confused. It's okay. They're growing up,
Yeah,
they're young,
I know.
inexperienced.
They are basically in their teens right now.
Emma's like 15, by the way.
Yeah, I'm 15. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, he's only 15. So just keep that in mind. He's like my little protege.
Yeah, that's it. Getting in a weird way, Ivan.
Trust me, it's gonna get much weirder as the time goes by.
Okay, great. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so Emma's gonna rant now.
Yeah,
I'm just warning you because he hit me up and said, we need to talk about this Yanny versus Laurel thing and why people care about it. So I'm gonna let you rant now because me personally, to be honest with you, I don't really give a shit. Like if people want to go crazy about it, whether it's the blue dress, the gold dress, Yanny, Laurel, have at it, man. As long as people find out, about maybe why it's happening, or I think these moments sort of in a way interest people in science, especially in like sensory and perception.
But so I think it's not gonna accomplish anything.
Okay, why do you think that? Here's where the rant starts.
Just because they do it for like 2 weeks. There's this 2-week period where everyone is talking about. Do you think that anyone after that gives a shit about science who listens to that?
But they don't have to care about science in general.
But
they've learned something
new. If it gets
new.
people interested in science or in the acoustic science in this case. They care about for 2 weeks and then they don't give a fuck anymore.
But once they know why it's happening and maybe they've looked at some explanation videos, by 2 weeks it's in their memory. So it doesn't, like, I'm not necessarily saying that these moments will make people scientists, because I don't think everyone needs to necessarily be a scientist.
No,
but I think at least it'll give them some type of, knowledge of something that's in science, which, we're both scientists, so we should just be happy.
Yeah, but that's not an important fact to know about science. There are way more important things that you should care about in science, even if you're not a scientist. Just basic knowledge.
Like what? Like, give an example, because you're the authority on what's important. Because that's the thing. Everything is.
For example, okay, let me start. I talked about this in the lab today with my colleagues.
Okay.
Gene manipulation. Nobody knows shit about them outside of the scientific community. I heard people say, I don't want genes in my carrot, in my tomato. What are, like, you don't even know what genes are. You can't make any living thing, or in this case, a part of a plant, without any genes. You're just stupid, and you should care about something like that. Like basic knowledge. We did gene manipulation basically over all our history. Do you look at cows when they were like back in the day before humans started to domesticate them? They didn't have that much milk. They just didn't give it because their calves don't need that much milk. But we start to cross them in different ways and start to manipulate them. And this is how we got the cows we know today. The same with bananas. And I could name a lot of examples, but people, as soon as they hear, genetic manipulation in my corn or whatever, I don't want that. Fuck that. Same with the gluten-free stuff. It's stupid. If you don't have an allergy, you can eat it. It's not healthy if you avoid gluten, and they don't basically know what gluten is at all. So I don't get the scientific investigation argument that's what's important about the Yanny and Laurel, but that's not what I wanted to talk, actually. That's a side rant. You brought me there. And
again, we have ramblings.
Oh, yeah, exactly. No, what I just find so, at the same time annoying and amazing, that people can get obsessed by easy things like that, by not important things. and there are so many important things to care about, that then you have something like this. Like, do you hear that or do you hear that? My whole Instagram feed was full. On the internet, it's all over. Like, important stuff is not on the internet that much as it is that Yanny and Laurel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I get what you're, but here, okay, I definitely understand what you're saying, but I think here's a problem that is always like sort of plague people in a way, right? It's like I think what you're signaling is more of an education problem, right? And us teach and an awareness problem of things that things that people should care about.
Yeah, because for example, what your priorities are.
Right, exactly. But what I'm saying is, like, how do you, to me, the way you instill that more likely, or at least more effectively, in my opinion, is through education. Because when you're like, at some point in life, like people who have jobs and they're just not, maybe they're not interested in it because school killed off their interest in this particular topic. And so they specialize in doing whatever else they want to do. And so they don't give a shit about what genes are, and even though I agree with you, they should.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that, like, I think that people would be more interested and just more receptive to knowing about things if it was, one, some of these ideas were presented in school, and if they were presented in a way that people could actually give a shit about. Because if you explain certain things, whether it's science or math or not just in STEM, but anything, if you explain it, I think, in the right way, and you sort of make it relatable to the audience that you're trying to present it to, I think they'll be interested in it. So, like, I think all these talk of genes, that's high school biology.
Yes.
Right? That's and a lot of people, they don't give a shit about high school biology. Why? Because they think it's boring. And why? Because the teachers that they had suck. Or at least that they suck at teaching.
Yeah.
And so I think that I'd rather put it like this. Even though I agree that Yanny versus Laurel or the dress is not the most important thing to know, right? What's important is going to vary depending on person to person, but I would rather them have something that they learned about it rather than nothing. Because in a way, like, yes, it may not be optimal and it may not necessarily be as helpful, but at least I think they learned something and it's cool to them. Because at this point, if you don't like science, right, you just generally are not into it because of whatever reason, you're only going to pay attention to things that are entertaining. Yeah. And so either and things like Yanny versus Laurel are just very entertaining. So I'm saying, like, in my opinion, if you want to put it out to people to learn more about important things, you have to make it entertaining, which can be done, but it's going to be very difficult. How are you going to make gene manipulation entertaining, right? Because now it's based on interest level, so they're not naturally interested in it anymore because that interest kind of died, and so now you have to bring them in and sort of sell it to them, right? And so at this point, I think you have to. I think that's what you need to aim for.
Yes, but then the question is, how are you gonna do that? And is there in our society a possibility to do that? Because always we want this quick, exciting stage. The same with the Yanny and Laurel. That's gonna peak for like 2 to 3 weeks. We all have fun, and then it dies off again, and nobody remembers until the next thing comes, and then we will. Oh yeah, there was the thing about the dress. Did you remember about the dress? I didn't remember. When they brought it up again, I was like, yeah, there was something about that. So it's basically our quick society that just wants quick excitement, and then it turns off again, and you're to the next high. And we have to get out of that circle and get
so go ahead.
And get people excited for the things that really can excite them for a long period of time.
Okay, so how would you? So do you have any idea of how we can make this how we can make very important science that's complicated in a way interesting to people? Because if you don't make it interesting, it's not going to work.
That's the hard part, because you know that if you make a great discovery in science, it's not simple. It involves a lot of different experiments, a lot of models, a lot of statistics, And to tone this down to really get all people excited or get like a whole population excited, that's really, really hard, and not just the scientific community. So I don't have a recipe how to do that, but that's something you should think about, or everyone should think about that wants to get people excited in their research, to figure out how you can make it more entertaining. But of course, you at the same time, you just don't want to dumb it down all the way just so you get people excited, but basically you don't tell them the real research that you did. So it's a tough question, I give you that. It's not easy at all to achieve something like that with some basic science, like neuroscience, or in my case, genetics or something like that.
Well, so to sum up, I if y'all are happy with Yanny versus Laurel, I'm not as upset as Em is about it. So
well, I'm only gonna be upset for like 1 or 2 weeks, then it's gonna tone down again. Basically,
yeah. In 5 months, he's gonna be like, "Oh my gosh, the Yanny Laurel thing."
I'm still upset about that one. No, I just wanted to say that people care about shit like that so much more than important shit they should care about that's going on in the world. But
that's the world, kind of, right? That's just how. Unfortunately, I think that's kind of the society we live in, right?
Yeah.
Where things that should be addressed aren't talked about, or they're not addressed. Which, like, you know, for like to me the biggest example is like climate change. And I don't know that much about climate science. I'm not even gonna lie, but I know this shit is. I believe science is when they say shit is happening.
It's 99.8% of the research says it's happening. So
right, and so what I'm saying is, like, if anything, this discussion should be one of the most important, because it's like, well, if we don't have a fucking climate, how we ain't even gonna be alive to do the shit that you want to do.
Yeah, we're gonna get all like, fucked. So
right, so it's like we should really be trying to solve this problem, because it's like you said, like, we all be fucked if we don't have a Earth. You know what I mean? To live in an atmosphere, like, that's gonna be so trash. Like, you know, we be all dead and shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we have to rely on Elon Musk that he gets us to Mars, because shit's gonna hit the fan here on Earth.
Exactly. Like, I can't listen to, like, you know.
Imagine what you have to build on Mars. Everything, the whole infrastructure. You don't have any Wi-Fi. You don't have any cell reception. You don't have any TV. Imagine. It's gonna be boring as fuck.
And you have to terraform it. So you have to make it more Earth-like.
Yeah, and you have to.
Yeah. So, yeah, but you know, it's unfortunate, you know, that these important topics aren't discussed. But I think, like you said, as researchers, we have to find a way to make. We can't, like, I think physicist Lawrence Krauss, he said something that really has, like, I still think about it. He said, as a lecturer, he said the worst mistake, the worst assumption you can make is to assume that the students that are in your class want to be there, and they think that it's interesting.
Yes.
So basically, you can't assume just because I'm in your class that I actually want to take this shit, especially if it's an intro class, because it's like, if it's intro or a very basic class, it's like, I'm here because I have to fulfill a requirement.
I know.
Now, if it's more of an advanced thing, then okay, yes, you probably want to be there because it's your major.
Yeah.
But, you know, as scientists, as researchers, as scholars, or whatever, or anything, even if you're just, you know, entertainer or whatever your profession is, if you think your shit is important, you have to know your audience and think about how to market it to your audience. And you should spend a lot of time doing that, just as much time as you spend actually working on your craft.
Yeah. But
work on how to get it out.
I think you have to get started when, like you said, with education from when they're kids, because I think a lot of people you could make it as entertaining as you want. They don't care because they're not interested in science, even if it's entertaining. So I think you have to start when they're kids in school to get them excited for being more interactive, like doing more experiments. I can remember the whole biology in high school didn't involve any experiments for me. So it was just the teacher on the blackboard writing something down, I learned it, that was it. And if it's more interactive, then it gets people more exciting than just learning stuff. And I think you have to start there. So you should start in the young generation, and then eventually more and more people get interested in science. But right now, I don't think you can make it so entertaining that a large mass of people is really interested in it.
But anyway, so like I said, we'll provide links to all our topics. But I guess now for our final topic, is free will, and it's all based on this is a long philosophical idea. This has been around for millennia. But basically, we both have read a book by a neuroscientist and philosopher, Sam Harris, and it's called Free Will. And basically, he investigates the concept of free will from a philosophical standpoint. So it is kind of a philosophy book, but it's more of a scientific philosophy.
Yeah.
So he argues more from a more materialist, a more scientific basis of why he believes that free will doesn't exist. So, do you want to introduce that topic, or should I?
Yeah.
His arguments.
Or his arguments are basically that there is no such thing as free will, just because you can measure it in the brain, that even before it comes into consciousness, it's already there what you're gonna do. And he basically says all your decisions that happened before, all your childhood, everything that formed you to the person you are, predetermines you to do something. So, for example, if you had a great childhood, you are more likely to do nice things or something like that, or act in one situation more nice, and if you got mistreated in your childhood. And that's basically his argument, that everything that formed you coming up to this moment basically decides what you're gonna do, and you're not gonna have a free will and decide this because you wanted to, just because everything before decides what you're gonna do at this moment. So
right, in a sense, consciousness, because we think because we're conscious, we have free wills that we're making these choices. But actually, what he argues is that basically the conscious experience is just basically the watcher looking. We're just observing what is happening, but everything that we choose and everything is basically just determined by underlying structures such as the brain, and which is determined by genetics, which is determined by physics. And this is a very reductionist, materialistic argument. And basically, just because you're conscious doesn't mean you have free will. So he's trying to get rid of this idea that we can make any choice we want, and which has been very popular in religion and in philosophy for a long time. That's basically
one of the most important things that religion argues, that is free will.
Because if you don't have free will, then it kind of makes no sense for God to punish you.
Yes.
Because it's nothing that you could have done differently, right? So therefore, religion sort of imports this idea of free will that you're your own agent. And Sam Harris is like, no, that's not true, and it has some very interesting implications, which I agree with. I don't necessarily agree with completely his argument, but I agree with that. For example, people who are in prison and people who are in jail for various crimes, even violent crimes, sex crimes, or anything like that, and this is going to sound wild, but it's me, so I'm wild. But I think the more you learn about a person's situation and their background, and the more you understand about them, the more empathy sometimes you tend to have.
Yes.
And so, for example, if a person grew up and they were molested and they were beaten and they were abused, they lived in a rough neighborhood or and everything like that, and then they grow up to be a serial killer or a rapist or something, basically like a very harsh criminal, yes. Right? I'm not saying that they shouldn't go to jail, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't be punished for their crimes, but sometimes, and of course, what they do is atrocious. Like I definitely don't want to, definitely not condoning, and I don't want to be insensitive to people who've gone through this. But I think that at the same time, if you know all these things happen, I think you deal with their punishment in a more empathetic manner. So maybe they need, because the purpose of prison and punishment, in a sense, is supposed to be really rehabilitation, right? And so you have to, if you know these factors are important, it should give you shouldn't look at them as demons or as devils. I mean, I agree that some people it's too late to save them. In that sense, I think you put them in a facility to make sure they don't harm other people. But I think basically what I'm saying is we label people too quickly as these demons and as these, monsters, when in a way they're hurting, and one saying we have is that hurt people. And so, and again, it doesn't make it right. It's definitely wrong. But I think that, you know, when you talk about prison reform and how we treat people, just based on how we treat people who wrong us. I mean, that other person could have also been hurt in a way, and that's why they hurt you. And I think that if we just take all sides into account, I think it'll, you know, this is cliche, but we'll love each other more. We'll try to have more empathy in the world instead of always judging based on how our life is, because it's very easy for you to judge the actions of a murderer when you haven't been, you know, say, seen violence your entire life or been traumatized your entire life by certain events. It's very easy to say, how could they do that? Because your life has been so different.
Yeah, and he basically argues that people are just unlucky sometimes, and they come into these situations. And for example, an example he brings in his book is, I don't remember the name, but there was this guy who basically killed, I think, the parents and maybe also the daughter. Well, first of all, he raped the daughter. And they found out after I think he was executed. And they looked at his brain and basically had a tumor. So before that, apparently, he didn't show any signs of crime. So basically, the tumor was responsible. And it's basically an extreme form of getting unlucky. And like you said, if you have situations in your childhood like molestation or something like that, you probably gonna act different than somebody who had a great childhood, and it wasn't your fault. You just got born into the situation. You didn't do anything about that. And so I think you're right when you're saying that we have to think about these people other than just these big monsters who do shit, because if you have free will, why would you do that? Then if you can decide to just not do that, then why are you deciding to do it? But if you see all the things he went through and why he probably then did do it, then it makes more sense to look at a person in a more empathetic way and not as this big monster. But I think it's also a slippery slope. What I got from the book is, like, he did talk about it in one way that he empathized with them, but on the other hand, he didn't then really answer the question how to deal with those people, because basically somebody could just say, well, if you're not responsible, why should we punish them?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I think his point was to just bring up, I think it was because it was a very short book. I think it wasn't meant to offer any solutions, which, you know, unfortunately a lot of philosophy does. It was kind of just meant to bring awareness and try to change your perspective, so therefore we could move forward in changing and forming solutions based on a change of perspective. He wasn't trying to do everything in one go. And while I agree that we should be more empathetic to people, his argument that while I agree that we are vastly constrained by our past and we make choices based on that, and that a lot of these choices are subconscious and stuff like that. And I don't agree with traditional arguments for free will. I do kind of believe that his reductionist argument was a little simplistic. And what I mean is that, okay, like, you know, it's the same thing. Okay, all behavior comes from the brain, which comes from blah, blah, blah. You keep going down and you're just a bunch of molecules, right?
Yes.
Which is just standard reductionism. And we were actually talking about this in my lab today because we're trying to understand intelligence or say, for example, depression. And it's this complex network of interactions. And I think that it's still reductionist the way you would understand it, but I think that we no longer can do very simple reductionist arguments, right? So even if, like, okay, your genes influence brain structure, right? I think about 80% of your genes are responsible for the brain in some way. And so, however, I also believe that your behavior, as we know, through epigenetics, influences how information is inherited to your children.
Yes. Right.
So there is basically what I'm saying is the type of reductionism that he is sort of championing is unidirectional. It only occurs in one direction. So you get genes, brain, behavior, outcome.
What would you argue then? What didn't he take into account that also is important?
I would say that all these levels interact, right? So your behavior, like epigenetics, your behavior can affect what is passed on through what is inherited to your kids. For example, I think that if, like, say for example, if I make a interrupt, like if I don't know, something happens in your brain, I think that will cause genes to be expressed in a different way.
Yeah, I know
right?
that if, for example, there's an interesting experiment in rat, if they don't get licked by the mother in the first couple of weeks, they don't build as much glucocorticoid receptors, so they are more likely to have
right. So
they are more anxious and have a higher probability to get psychological diseases. So it's all working together. You're right.
Right. So that's what I mean. Like, and if you're, like, for example, if you're an alcoholic, say, okay, you start drinking alcohol, and then you may have the mind of a person who's predisposed to alcoholism, and then there's factors that somewhat influence you to become an alcoholic. But over time, as we know, if you're an alcoholic for years and years and years, that affects your brain.
Yes.
Which then also affects your behavior, which then will affect your epigenetics that you pass on to the next. Like, you know what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying.
I think that's basically true about everything. You can't just reduce it to all the way down and say that's a thing that decides the whole thing. Basically, there are multiple parts interacting with each other, and that's gonna make the whole picture.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's still reductionism, as I was arguing today in my life. It's still reductionism, but it's just a more, in a way, yes, more complex. It has more moving parts, but I think it's a more realistic representation of the pattern that is going on. Because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for patterns, yes, and understanding the relationship between factors. And so it's not simple. I think simple reductionism in science, unless you're doing like very, very simple experiments or a very, very simple phenomenon that you're looking at, simple reductionism doesn't work anymore. So you need a more holistic reductionist viewpoint.
Yeah.
And we always need a reductionism because we want to understand, okay, this thing, what this is that, or we want to understand this relationship in some way.
Yeah.
And we want to map it by, this corresponds to this. And so we have to have reductionism as scientists, but I think we have to rethink in what way we view reductionism.
Yeah.
And so, which of course, I guess we didn't define it. Basically, reductionism is the view that basically you have a phenomenon and it can be reduced or explained by maybe a underlying level, like maybe a more simpler level, or a lower level is responsible for a higher level that happens. And we explain like genes, brain, and behavior.
Yeah.
But what we're arguing is that view of reductionism, just that very simple pathway, is actually multi-directional.
Yeah, I think with that we can wrap it up for today.
Yeah.
So thank you everyone who listened today, and we're gonna see you the next time.